feasts be extended out to everybody, a kind of first century priesthood of all believers. The washing of hands, food, and cooking utensils were one example. Pharisees did not think of these observances as replacing the moral law, but they were seen rather as important spiritual practices and disciplines. So the Pharisees would agree with Jesus that violations of the moral law arise from the heart and the mind and the will. You can hear in your imagination their reply to Jesus. Jesus, we agree with you that violations of the moral law come from the heart, but we're not talking about the moral law. We're talking about spiritual practices that have to do with religious purity. Oh yeah, the Pharisees were a decent sort. They supported their nation. They were progressive, generous, tolerant, honest, true blue. In Kokomo, you would find Pharisees in well-mannered homes with well-mannered children. They'd be working for the United Way, contributing to schools and churches, members of the Rotary or the Kiwanis, and probably members of the Methodist, Baptist, Presbyterian, Disciples, or Episcopal Church. Pharisees weren't narrow, nor were they painfully pious. No, they were the kind of people you'd want for your friends. So these two interpretations unfairly treat the Pharisees as villains. Notice, Jesus takes another tack. Jesus is constantly violating religious observances in favor of doing ministry. Jesus heals on the Sabbath, touches a leper and a dead child, is touched by a woman suffering from hemorrhages, and he does not fast. He eats with tax collectors and notorious sinners. Each one of these things is a violation of the Pharisees' understanding of religious practice designed to maintain boundaries between faithful Jews and all others. Jesus' behavior seems to say, beware when your spiritual practice gets in the way of fulfilling the heart of the law, which is love of God and love of neighbor. Well, we can understand the situation in which Jesus finds himself because our situation today is much the same. For many Christians today, there seems to be a need to guard the borders of religious identity. All sorts of issues are lifted up as identity defining, and the stance that one takes with regards to them determines whether one is a so-called Christian. In our American context, most of those issues have to do with human sexuality. Abortion, contraception, sexual orientation, gender identity, they've all been made into boundary-defining issues, lines in the sand for whether one judges others to be Christian or not. In the minds of many, these are not matters on which Christians may hold divergent opinions and remain in fellowship with each other while holding divergent opinions. Rather, opposition to these practices and dimensions of personhood are seen as part and parcel of maintaining the core of Christian faith in an increasingly secular world. Importantly, please notice, Jesus doesn't condemn the practice of ritual cleansing nor does he condemn keeping the Sabbath. Both are good traditions, ways to honor God and to lead a healthy life. The problem arises when spiritual practices intended to bring life to the spirit and life to the community become barriers to reaching out to others with the mercy and the love of God. Jesus was always willing to violate a spiritual practice if that practice was a barrier to doing ministry. The question that drove the Pharisees was about more than hand washing and food preparation. The driving question was the important one of how to maintain religious identity and spiritual integrity. That same question motivates many contemporary Christians. That question of how does one maintain Christian identity and integrity? Our response can't be better than that of Jesus. When asked what was the greatest of when Jesus was asked what was the greatest of God's commands, Jesus answered, love God and love neighbor. It's as simple as that. And it's as complex as that. Amen.